We're aware of one apology, which is Stuart Dixon. Any others? Okay.
Oh, Philip Logan, Chair. Sorry, Philip Logan.
Philip Logan, okay. Members, on Monday I was in Cardiff, the latest EC UK meeting, which is the committees from the three devolved institutions, the Lords, the Commons, which have European affairs. For the first time, there are also representatives from the Commons Select Committee on exiting the European Union. They sent 3 MPs to it. In terms of what was discussed, it was a broad discussion on the implications of leaving the European Union. It was felt that rather than wait 6 months for the next meeting, we should get together after the Supreme Court has ruled, but before Article 50 is triggered, so potentially February. There was also a kind of side meeting between the representatives of Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and we felt it might be useful if the 3 devolved administrations had a separate meeting to discuss areas of mutual interest. And in terms of what was discussed, and I think this is a personal view, as we discuss things like trade deals post-Brexit, it became clear to me, and in trying to sound people out sidelines, a suggestion that when powers are repatriated to London, if they are then to be further devolved, it's more likely to be on a federal basis of one size fits all for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, rather than the current policy of an asymmetrical devolved basis. And that, I think, should concern us, because I'm not sure that our needs are exactly similar to Wales's or indeed Scotland's. So just something to keep an eye on, members. Anybody want to ask anything about EC UK? Okay. The Chairperson's Liaison Group also met on Monday. I was obviously in Cardiff, so not able to attend, but chairpersons and clerks of statutory committees were asked to be reminded that responses from departments to the Committee for Finance in relation to questions contained in the budget research paper are now overdue, and committees might wish to raise the issue with their departments as appropriate. Our department contacted staff on the 24th of November to advise additional time would be required by them due to the detail involved in the questions, but a response has still not been provided on the 7th of December. So shall we write to the Executive Office on this matter? Thank you. Our trip to Brussels in January, members?
Just go back on that. There is speculation, and it's nothing more than speculation, that the House will be recalled on the 19th to look at the budget. We would obviously be helpful if there is a paper available to see that in advance of that.
Well, indeed. I've been at a couple of events in Belfast, one at a law firm, where they told me you are being recalled on the 19th, 20th to discuss the budget. Not are you being, but we know you're being. There's been no notification, but yeah, I think that would make sense.
With that in mind, I mean, is it sensible to leave some authority at the call of the chair or whatever, some briefing at the earliest point, Executive Office officials to brief those members who are available, hopefully before the 19th.
Chair, my understanding is that it won't actually be a budget. It'll be more of a statement of finances or along those lines on the 19th, and the fuller budget. I have to say this I understand it will be week commencing the 9th of January, I think, maybe. And the committee has scheduled in a session on that basis with TEO officials on the 18th of January on the actual TEO position.
So the 19th is just a statement?
And I have to say, I'm not sure of the detail, but my understanding is it's not the detailed budget.
Right.
Okay, but I think then we'll, at a minimum, we write to the department with regard to this request. Okay. So yes, Brussels members at page 3 have tabled is the travel proposal, with the reminder that we're talking about one per party from this committee. The good news is the Director of Parliamentary Services and Clerk Assistant have confirmed that they're both content with the proposals. Committee staff are liaising with the Office of the Northern Ireland Executive in Brussels to work up a detailed agenda for the visit. It looks like members are going to travel out on Tuesday, January the 24th, returning either on that Thursday evening or Friday morning, and most likely the flights will be in and out of Dublin. We're proposing that within your visit you will engage with the Office of the Northern Ireland Executive, the 3 local MEPs, and some non-EU representatives in Brussels. Could I suggest it might also be useful, if it's possible, to get a meeting with a representative of the Northern Ireland Task Force, formerly the Barossa Task Force? Yep.
We should also attempt to meet certainly UKREP, UK representation.
Yes. And the Irish representative? Mm-hmm. Okay, members, could you confirm at the earliest convenience who will be travelling on behalf of your parties so that staff can put the travel arrangements in place, please? Sean, already? Danny?
Okay.
Yes. You guys need time?
Yeah. I want to get out of Brussels, Chair, and not go to it.
Well, Richie, you're on your own, so...
Very easy for me to make decisions. But I was saying to somebody yesterday, it's like waiting on a bus, and then 2 or 3 buses come. There's 2 visitations that week. There's a visitation from Standards and Privileges to Wales and to London.
Ah, okay. Well, we'll put you down in the meantime, and obviously Stuart's the sole Alliance member, so really just to wait for the DUP to nominate. Okay, thank you, members.
Chair, sorry, to go back on the budget, this is what was in the research paper, this is what has been given.
When the research
assembly.
paper members just come
Right,
back to the
written.
budget, a written assembly
It's
statement
talked
on the 17th of December?
No, it was last year.
On the 19th of December, all right. And then the budget document to be laid on the 9th of January, and an assembly debate and vote on the 31st of January.
Now, obviously, there's talk about that not being a written statement, that there
That
could
might
be a
be,
recall.
might be an oral statement on the 19th of December, but those were indicative times. Yeah. Okay. To Christmas, members, a suggested list of recipients of our Christmas greetings is at page 5 of your main pack. Very important members have the opportunity to peruse and suggest.
You're the lucky people.
It's a fairly standard list, members. The table pack's longer than the main pack, isn't it? Happy enough? Okay, thank you very much. The list includes executive ministers, arm's length bodies, etc., etc. So these will be e-cards, and they'll be sent on behalf of the committee to all on the list. Now, TBUC Engagement Forum, there's an email about that on page 6. It's focusing on reconciliation, respect and shared space. It's Thursday, February the 23rd next year at Girdwood. And there's an invitation at page 8 of table papers to an engagement meeting. This is the Commission on Flags, Identity, Culture and Tradition. And they're focusing on section 75. And this invitation is to NICVA on the 19th of December, and I would ask you to respond directly if you wish to attend. Current list of invitations is at page 7, just to note. Now, members, when FM and DFM were in front of us and we were talking about the various formats for this programme for government consultation, I think we heaped some praise on them for the fact that there was a children's version. But it turns out we don't just take an interest in arm's length bodies, they take an interest in us. And the Commissioner for Children and Young People has contacted me to say, yes, there is a child-friendly version, but it only came out 3 weeks after the consultation began, which means it's only in play for 5 weeks for young people. And those 5 weeks, the 5 weeks closest to Christmas, so in her opinion, not particularly suitable for attracting the attention of young people. And she also wants us to know that as far as she can ascertain, or within any consultation events on this period of consultation, she doesn't see any which are specifically geared to children and young people.
Should we draw her comments to the attention of the department?
Well, I think there was a written question, I think, from a member which elicited the response that there was to be a child-friendly version, and that date would indicate there was plenty of time to get it out for the full 8 weeks. So I would suggest there are 2 things we might do, members. One is to write to the Executive Office and ask for their response, because there may be, you know, it may be something as simple as printers letting them down. And the other thing is, I think it has to be reflected in the report we're going to consider in closed session at the end, because we were going to simply praise the department for producing a child-friendly version, but I think we need to reflect the Commissioner's views. We don't have to comment on the Commissioner's views, but I think we should reflect the Commissioner has made her views known. Content?
Great.
Okay, thank you very much. Draft minutes. There are 2 sets of draft minutes for you today, members, for the morning and afternoon meetings of Wednesday the 30th of November. They begin at page 9 in your meeting pack. And as ever, the question is, are members content to agree the draft minutes of the 2 meetings of the 30th of November?
Great.
Thank you. Members, we had previously, if you remember when we were hearing evidence from abuse victims about the historical institutional abuse, one member made some very hard-hitting comments about an archbishop who obviously was not here to respond, and we contacted him and offered him the opportunity to respond. And consequently, the chairperson's liaison group, I think at our encouragement, have written to the chairs of other committees to say we think effectively it is good practice if somebody is mentioned at a committee that they're alerted and given the right to reply. Well, of course, during our session with FM and DFM, we did at the end get into the detail with regard to Mr. D. Stitt. So I think, in fairness, we have to write to Mr. Stitt, make him aware of the Hansard, and offer him the right of reply.
Do we copy the Hansard to him as an extract, just to give him?
Indeed.
And just to be clear, Chair, Archbishop Martin replied, which he did, he replied, someone has the right to reply or the right not to reply without any inference being placed upon their character by so doing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
He can ignore it, he can write back, he can ask to brief us. Entirely up to him. I make no assumption that anybody mentioned to this committee feels that we are so important that they have to exercise a right to reply. But I think, having set the precedent, it would be entirely wrong not to follow through. So we're content to write in neutral terms. Thank you. Outstanding committee correspondence is on page 18, and of course this is responses from the department that remain outstanding or for which further information is required. Content to note, members?
Great.
Okay, our first briefing, we had requested research on how other European countries who are not part of the EU engage with EU treaties and agreements, and how non-EU European states negotiate with the EU. The committee noted the research paper on the 9th of November and also agreed that we would invite Michael Potter from Research to give us an oral briefing. It should give us a useful background in advance of that Brussels visit.
Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. Could I just take us back very briefly just to the previous item? I think it would be, if it's going to be adopted by the committee as standing practice, that anyone that's mentioned in evidence given is written to, then there's no need for the committee on an individual basis to decide on that. We're just going to adopt it as a standing convention now, that if someone's mentioned in evidence, I'm sorry for holding you back, if someone's mentioned in evidence, it's now going to be the standard practice of the committee that the clerk will write to them. Is that?
Well, not just any name, but clearly the Archbishop was mentioned in some detail quite negatively. In terms of Mr. Stitt, it was a reasonably significant discussion and not entirely positive. So I think there has to be a level of judgment call. I mean, if we're just saying, Patrick Nelson's Chief Executive of the Irish Football Association, we're hardly going to write and say, you've been mentioned. It's where we believe they need to write a reply.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, it's typical where you draw the line in that, but...
Yeah, well, that's a judgment call for the committee.
No, Chair, and I appreciate that. And I mean, I brought up at the start in relation to that matter, the actual chairperson liaison group should be, liaising with the chairs to be mindful of that and watch. And it is, like you say, what happens on the day, how you judge, how any of the chairs judge it. That's the main thing as well.
Right, Cal, it'll be useful actually. Was there a kind of consensus at the chairperson's liaison group?
No, unfortunately, I missed the last one, but I mean, that's how it
arose in the first place.
Arose from that, and that's why I say, I mean, just to protect, because you're right. I mean, there's other instances where people will be mentioned.
Yeah. I think it's a judgment call, but I would like to think, William, in most cases it'll be obvious that my test would be, if it was me that was being talked about, would I want to know so that I could choose whether I wish to reply or not. Okay, members, there's a clerk's brief on page 21 of your pack, and the research paper begins at page 22. As you say, we've already had that paper since November, but today it's about having an oral brief from Michael. Michael, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much,
Over
Chair.
to you.
So just by way of introduction, the committee asked me to look at how European countries not in the EU engage with the EU and the rest of the world, generally, specifically Norway and Switzerland. So, as the Chair mentioned, it's on page 22 of your packs. And this paper just provides a general overview. I'm sure you'll glean much more information on your trip to Brussels on the detail of their engagement. Just to say that there is an error in the paper. Just to point out to you, on page 8 of the paper, which is page 29 of your packs, there's a statement there that Switzerland agreed to contribute €100,000 to the EU for the EU Cohesion Fund. That should be 100 million. It's been amended in the published version, so apologies for that, just in case you're basing your deliberations on a false figure. So I'll point that out. Yeah, absolutely. So it should be stated at this point that the Prime Minister has ruled out a Swiss model or a Norwegian model. Rather, this paper just informs potential outcomes in relation to whatever bespoke arrangement is concluded with the EU, none of which has been announced as of yet. Both states are part of the European Free Trade Association, EFTA, along with Iceland and Liechtenstein. Norway is also part of the European Economic Area, the EEA. Switzerland declined to join the EEA by referendum. The use of referenda has a particular role in Swiss policy making and politics, which I'll return to briefly later on in the presentation. The institutional relationships between the EU, EFTA and EEA are complex. There's a diagram on page 4 of the paper, so that will be page 25 of your packs there. So it's quite a complex diagram, but it does give an idea of the kind of relationships, but specifically how intermixed they are as institutions. or as bodies. In broad terms, EFTA is a European trade bloc that negotiates trade deals with the EU and other countries and other trade blocs. The EEA is a trade arrangement with the EU that encompasses a significant degree of economic convergence with the EU, but without full membership. So it's more or less the economic bits of the EU without the political bits. While not EU members, both Norway and Switzerland participate in a number of EU programmes. Norway as an EEA member and Switzerland through negotiated packages referred to as bilaterals. While neither pays into the EU Central Fund, both make financial contributions commensurate with the level of their involvement. The EU is the most important trade partner for both countries, but such access requires the acceptance of the 4 freedoms of people, goods, services and capital. Both countries also have other important trading partners outside the EU. The table on page 11 of the paper, that's page 32 of your packs, it summarises the most important trade partners for Norway and Switzerland, but also for comparative purposes, I've added the UK, Iceland, Turkey and Ukraine. So you have the UK obviously as a comparator, Iceland as another non-EU European country, Turkey, which has a customs union with the EU, and Ukraine, which has just negotiated a free trade agreement with the EU. While there are no hard and fast patterns to identify from the table, it can be said that geography rather than EU membership plays a significant role in trade relations. That said, in each case, there is a default assumption of trade with the EU for all of those parties on whatever basis. Both Norway and Switzerland share features that have practiced considerable economic and legal convergence with the EU, but their populations have remained generally Eurosceptic, having signalled opposition to EU membership through referenda. The reality, however, is that policy and legislation in both countries have had a certain degree of EU compatibility built into them. The current issue for Switzerland is that the country has been renegotiating the free movement of migrants with the EU due to a referendum carried out in 2014, which calls for quotas on such migration. But access to the single market is dependent on unrestricted movement of EU citizens. The dilemma for the Swiss government is how to maintain access to the single market while keeping pace with public opinion within their own country. So that's it, broad brush. Chair, do you have any questions?
Yes, Michael, thank you very much. Have you ever come across an example where a deal is done without the 4 freedoms, like with 3 freedoms, 2?
I think the EU has stated it quite clearly, and again yesterday Michel Barnier stated that there can be no access to the single market without the 4 freedoms. The EU is very clear about that.
And there is no precedent for less than 4?
No, not that I've seen. Not that I've seen. Mm-hmm. Certainly it's not the case for these 2.
So we've had, in recent days, some very senior cabinet ministers, Boris Johnson yesterday, saying, you know, that they would not rule out, in theory, some sort of payment into the EU for access. What's the most likely model that would give us a clue? Is it possible to answer that?
It's not really, simply because it's difficult, because the Prime Minister has ruled out a Norway or a Swiss model as such. It'll be difficult to equate what might happen to that. But my understanding is that any negotiation will be bespoke and any payment will be commensurate with whatever access the UK has negotiated with the EU, however those negotiations are carried out. Yeah.
She has ruled out, but then yesterday when she said, I want a red, white and blue Brexit, I know ITV News were speculating that red, white and blue could be the red, white and blue of the Norwegian flag, but maybe they were just being a little mischievous. Philip.
Well, when I signalled to speak, Michael then kind of went on to answer. I mean, it was essentially around the free trade buy-off with freedom of movement. I get just a wee bit perplexed when I listen to British Prime Ministers or British Ministers talking about the outcome of negotiations. I mean, they obviously aren't listening to what's been said from Europe, and they obviously, I mean, aren't listening to things that you're coming to us in terms of other arrangements. So, I mean, the negotiations are going to be, I'm not going to use the term fun, but I think that people who maybe voted one way based on certain arguments about freedom of movement and all of that may have some cause for reflection later on. But when you asked the question, Michael gave the answer. I mean, essentially, there won't be any, or there isn't up until this point, any free trade agreements without freedom of movement.
As far as I can see, I mean, I could look into that. It's quite interesting to see what arrangement Ukraine has in terms of visa liberalisation and that kind of thing. That would be that'd be an extension of this paper. But I'm happy to look at that for examples.
Starting at page 34 of the packs, Michael, you start listing offices in Brussels which are Norwegian.
Yes.
Industry Norway, Energy Norway, well, there's something like 40 of them. So on the face of it, I mean, we have one, obviously, although that's not as a national office. Is that exceptional, that number?
My understanding, I couldn't find a similar list for Switzerland. I did look for one, but that seems to be fairly standard, and it's kind of indicative of the amount of commitment that Norway, even though it's not an EU member, has in terms of engagement with the EU institutions, and that goes across all sectors of Norway. So each region of Norway would have a regional office within the EU. NGOs do, trade unions do, businesses do, of course. So there's quite a cross section. It'd be quite interesting to see what when you go to Brussels, if you get to talk to any of those, the depth and degree of their engagement.
There's 40 organisations, far fewer addresses, so obviously a lot of them are sharing accommodation. So the Office of Northern Ireland Executive in Brussels could potentially be home to a dozen, 2 dozen different units, I suppose. But it's a huge commitment, 40 different organisations. Danny.
Thanks, Michael, for the paper. Just on the issue, what's your understanding if the, if 4 principles are essential? What then is the requirement in terms of EU regulations and adherence to regulations? Mm-hmm. Any insight on that?
Well, certainly Norway applies the entire acquis communautaire for all of the 4 freedoms. So that's a whole raft of regulations, and it will be built into the legislation as well. So both Switzerland and Norway ensure that all the necessary legislation is EU compliant in that sense.
And so they would honour those even though they're not technically members. Are they expected to honour those, or is that a voluntary
No, they'll be expected to, yeah.
They would be expected to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or do they have any variance, or do they stand apart in any of them?
Not to my knowledge. I mean, all the sources I've looked at have said they're generally compliant. In fact, Switzerland goes one further in that a lot of the legislation that is being processed would actually be checked for EU compliance, even if it's not necessarily directly related to the 4 freedoms.
Refresh my memory, did the Swiss or the Norwegians ever attempt to join or either withdraw from EU, or from EC, EU, or
both had options to join the EU, and both the governments approached the EU to join, and both of their populations decided not to in a referendum.
Cal.
Thanks, Chair. I can see why you've said that they wouldn't be looking at these 2 models, because just after answering the question to Donny about the checks and balances in terms of legislation, that's one way they want to move it. But just in all that you've looked at now, is there any, like, there's discussion about a special state? Is there any formula out there amongst those 4 countries there that's working? And is there a
Well,
formula?
in the two I've looked at, no, not really. I mean, I think they'd both negotiated a particular status, and I think that's the thing about the EU. They do negotiate bespoke relationships, as it has been doing with Turkey and Ukraine. But certainly Switzerland has been told in no uncertain terms that they can't introduce quotas on migrants, and they're trying to get around it at the moment through legislation domestically that doesn't quite say what it said in the referendum, but also can still meet the needs of the EU, and they're still negotiating that. And that is to have legislation whereby jobs are advertised locally first, and if they can't recruit locally, then they can recruit elsewhere. That doesn't necessarily affect the free movement of people, and it doesn't introduce quotas as such.
In terms of legislative process, you'd be getting into a social clause type thing.
Yeah.
That countries wouldn't be, no. Another point then is in terms of, you say you pay for what you get. Let's simplify the terms in terms of what's commensurate there. What's, can you delve into that a wee bit more? What examples is there?
Yeah. Essentially, both countries, they pay in to certain programs in the EU, and there's lists of the programs they're each involved in. The EEA obviously being more involved than Switzerland would be. So they basically pay in an amount commensurate to the involvement they have in those programs. It's actually really difficult to get hard and fast figures on what they actually do pay in, because there's such complexity in the system as to how they do that. But it seems to be, you just pay into the programs that you're interested in.
Thank you.
Because neither pays into the central fund. That's the thing.
And you still have the 27 countries are going to make a decision on whether that's, it's grand. Thank you for the paper. Yeah, thank you.
Two final, if I may, Michael, one for each country. In terms of Switzerland, you said in the paper that the freedom of movement of people was becoming problematic.
Yes.
Can you expand on that?
In Switzerland, yes, there's been some resistance to other EU migrants coming in, and the referendum in 2014 called for quotas. The political system in Switzerland is quite interesting in that if you can get enough signatures, you can, as a citizen, you can trigger a referendum of some sort to make a policy decision. So it's not a referendum isn't necessarily led by the government at all. So a referendum was held in 2014 calling for quotas, and the population called for quotas on EU migrants, and that left Switzerland in a difficult position because under their arrangements with the EU they couldn't. So either they change the arrangement with the EU or they don't abide by the referendum.
Okay. And in terms of these 40 Norwegian organisations, did you readily identify a kind of lead one, a sort of national government one, rather than a sectoral one?
Oh, no, I didn't look into too much detail of the list. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No.
Yeah.
Michael, listen, thank you very much. That's.
Thanks.
Oh, no.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Beg your pardon.
Just in terms of the four freedoms, there are moves afoot to restrict the freedom of movement from EU member states at the present time. Is that accurate insight?
In Switzerland?
No. I mean, for example, Angela Merkel has talked about the need to restrict, so the four freedoms may not be as inviolable as they were before the referendum result in Britain. Is that a fair assessment of where things are at?
My understanding is, and this has an impact on the Norwegian-Swedish border as well, that generally refers to the external borders of the EU, to restrict movement in and out, but also to allow member states provisions to have checks internally. But that's, my understanding is that's not for EU citizens as such, it's for non-EU.
Okay, in terms,
but I can stand corrected on that one. Yeah.
Is there an example anywhere in Europe of one part of a country having a different relationship or set up with the European Union than another part of a country?
Yes, that would be Denmark and Greenland. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And Greenland's obviously considerably away,
yes,
far removed.
Yeah.
And in terms of special status, say for example, there's talk, or there was talk that Catalonia looking special status. That's
Right.
not, that principle is not going to be conceded by the Spanish government, obviously for obvious reasons. And is there any evidence at all that the European Union would be prepared to concede some concept of special status, either Scotland, Northern Ireland, wherever?
I think you answered the question there yourself in that all,
Never ask a question you don't know the answer to.
no, in that any decision about that would have to be agreed by all the EU states, and I imagine there'll be a number of EU states that wouldn't necessarily want that to happen.
Thank you.
Okay, Michael, thank you very much indeed. Members, just again thinking about this Brussels trip, if you look at the list of all these Norwegian organisations, there's a Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Authorities. There is also, delightfully, a West Norway European Office, a South Norway European Office, and a North Norway European Office. Would it be worth trying to get a meeting with one or two of the Norwegian groups? Don't all shout at once.
It's up to those who are going there. Is there an East Way? No.
There is actually, yeah. But I thought the North Norway might appeal to you guys.
I think it'd be useful if we could get a central view from, from the control room in terms of Brussels, what their input is.
Well, shall we ask the boys in the executive office in Brussels?
The directors.
But express an interest if they think it's valuable. Okay. Okay, second briefing then, members. If you could cast your minds back to the 12th of October, we noted correspondence from the Northern Ireland Retired Police Officers Association, and their issue was a complaints procedure against the Police Ombudsman for Northern Ireland. And we agreed to ask research to identify examples, if there were any, of where one ombudsman's office could be referred to another ombudsman, and also to look at the options currently open to anybody who was unhappy with the actions or a report of the Police Ombudsman for Northern Ireland. So again, on the 9th, we noted the research paper, issues relating to Public Services Ombudsman and the Police Ombudsman for Northern Ireland, and as with Michael, we agreed to ask Ray if he would come and give us an oral briefing. So Clark's brief, page 42, paper itself, page 43, and correspondence from the Retired Police Officers Association at 54. And Ray McCaffrey from Research is with us. Thanks for joining us, Ray.
Sure.
Over to you.
Thank you. Chair, as you say, the research was asked to look at two issues, examples of ombudsmen's offices which have been the subject of investigation by another ombudsman, and options for recourse that currently exist for those who are unhappy with the actions or reports of the Police Ombudsman for Northern Ireland. I should say the research limited itself to looking at Public Services Ombudsman in Scotland, Wales and the Republic of Ireland. It didn't examine the arrangements, for example, for Financial Ombudsman. Although it didn't find evidence of ombudsmen essentially investigating other ombudsman offices, it did look at what, if any, accountability measures exist in relation to Public Service Ombudsmen in Scotland, Wales and the Republic of Ireland. Just at the outset, and I think it's made clear in the paper, it's important to distinguish between customer service complaints, complaints around maladministration such as delay or rudeness in relation to a Public Service Ombudsman, and decisions reached by an ombudsman. So it's separating the service received and the actual decisions reached by an ombudsman. I think that distinction is very important. In terms of customer service complaints, the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman will investigate complaints internally, but if a person is still unhappy, they will be put in touch with the independent customer complaints reviewer. This is a non-statutory role established voluntarily by the Scottish Ombudsman in 2007. There are currently 2 independent customer complaints reviewers, and details of their work are included in the annual report of the Ombudsman. Similarly, in Wales, if people aren't satisfied after the Ombudsman's office has investigated their customer service maladministration complaint, they will be referred to the independent external reviewer of complaints, again, who is an appointment of the Ombudsman. Furthermore, complaints about the service are also reported annually to the Ombudsman's Advisory Panel, which is made up of independent members, in other words, not employees of the Ombudsman. Just briefly, in the Republic of Ireland, again, there is an internal procedure for dealing with complaints made against staff. Unlike in Scotland and Wales, I couldn't find evidence of a mechanism to refer complaints to another set of people who can review the issues if necessary, and the complaint does seem to be dealt with internally by the Ombudsman staff. So, Chair, that deals with how Ombudsman offices address customer service stroke maladministration complaints. In terms of reviewing decisions reached by the Ombudsman, in other words, if you're unhappy about the outcome of an investigation, in Scotland the decision can only be legally challenged through judicial review, but the Ombudsman will review decisions if the complainant can prove that there were inaccuracies in the evidence that the Ombudsman used to reach his decision. The Ombudsman will also take into account any new relevant information that the complainant can produce. In Wales, the Ombudsman has in place an internal process to review decisions, but once this is exhausted, there is no further appeal or review unless new issues come to light. The Ombudsman also advises that there may be legal options available to people, and the person is therefore advised to take legal advice in such circumstances. In the Republic of Ireland, there is an internal appeals procedure to re-examine the outcome of a decision, but there can only be one appeal of a complaint decision. So, Chair, that's now dealt with the situation regarding the outcomes of investigations. Turning now to the other issue, the accountability of the Police Ombudsman for Northern Ireland. The Ombudsman has in place a customer complaints policy dated June 2016, which details the various stages of the complaints process. It makes clear that, and I quote, complaints of maladministration against the Police Ombudsman and his staff can be raised with the Department of Justice only after the internal complaints process has been exhausted. So, for example, I could only go. It's similar to what happens with the Public Services Ombudsman. I could only go to the Northern Ireland Public Services Ombudsman with a complaint after I had exhausted the internal complaints process of whatever organisation I'd been dealing with. So, in the case of the Police Ombudsman, a person can only go to the Department of Justice after they've exhausted all the avenues with the Police Ombudsman. And the members can see that the paper contains an extract from the complaints policy. It lists examples of types of complaints, including unexpected delay, administrative error, lost documents, poor customer care, and intimidation. But the policy makes the distinction that the majority of complaints tend to be about the outcome of an investigation. It states that there is no statutory appeal mechanism within the Police Northern Ireland Act 1998 for decisions taken by the Police Ombudsman, but it does state that in the interests of providing an open and accountable complaint system, the Ombudsman will review cases where a stakeholder has made a customer complaint. But the policy makes the important distinction that while the Department of Justice will consider all complaints of maladministration, it won't deal with complaints about the outcome of an investigation. Where the complaint is about the outcome of a Police Ombudsman investigation, the policy advises that it may be possible to pursue the matter by way of judicial review. So if you have a complaint of maladministration, you can escalate it to the department once you've gone through the complaints procedure. If you have a complaint about the outcome of an investigation, the Police Ombudsman will review it, but beyond that, your only recourse could well be judicial review. Chair, it might just be useful to mention just very briefly, one other police oversight body. The Police Investigations and Review Commissioner in Scotland undertakes independent investigations into the most serious incidents involving the police, and also provides independent scrutiny of the way police bodies operating in Scotland respond to complaints from the public. The Commissioner falls under the remit of the Scottish Public Services Ombudsman for the purposes of maladministration. But if a person is dissatisfied about the outcome of an investigation, then the only way to overturn it is by way of judicial review. So, Chair, really just a couple of points to finish with. Public Services Ombudsman cannot be investigated, or the research didn't find evidence of them being able to be investigated by other ombudsmen. And I suppose given the sort of quasi-judicial role that they have, this isn't entirely unexpected. The question, I suppose, that arises is, would it be appropriate to place the Police Ombudsman under the remit of the Northern Ireland Public Services Ombudsman for the purposes of investigating cases of maladministration only? So the Northern Ireland Public Services Ombudsman would, quite rightly and obviously, have no role in relation to looking at the outcomes of investigations. The other issue related to the first that arises is, are the current mechanisms for reporting maladministration sufficient in relation to the Police Ombudsman? Is the Department of Justice best placed to deal with those complaints? Is there another mechanism that could sit there, perhaps? Chair, those are just a couple of issues maybe for further consideration. Happy to try to address any questions.
Yep, no, that's good. Thank you, Ray. I'm just wondering, because I think this is part of the argument from the retired police officers, that there isn't an absolutely clear line between maladministration and a determination, in that they would argue that the determination was wrong because there was maladministration, specifically with regard to dissatisfaction with the investigation process. Do you think, I mean, that, and don't be commenting on stuff you think goes beyond your brief.
I probably wouldn't want to comment on it, Chair. The only thing I would say is that, you know, there could be value in sort of looking at why the Office of the Police Ombudsman is set up in the way it is. I know there's a lot of legislation around it, beyond the establishing legislation. So I probably wouldn't want to comment further, Chair.
No, I think it's probably one for the politicians at the table. Criminal Justice Inspection, what is their specific role?
Oh, I think they just, Chair, I think they're just tasked with reviewing.
So they kind of quality assure the operation?
It's sort of more of a quality assurance role. I just put that in for a bit of context to say that the office doesn't, I mean, there's, you know, it is reviewed by another body, but it's nothing to do with...
There's no point going to them if you're unhappy.
Absolutely.
If it's maladministration, you keep going back to the Police Ombudsman until they've said, that's it, we've done every review in our book, and then your only alternative is the Department of Justice.
Yes, Chair.
And if you don't like the result, you go to court, if you can afford to, or a judicial review.
But the department has no role in reviewing outcomes?
No, sorry, no. So then, if you don't like what the Police Ombudsman's put in the report, your only recourse is to try and argue with the Police Ombudsman that you've got it wrong, there's fresh information. But your only other external recourse is to the courts for a judicial review.
Yes.
Danny.
Thanks for the presentation. Just, are there any examples yet emerging from even Scotland who have a sort of a semi-process at least of appeal against decisions that people are unhappy with?
I haven't looked at any specific examples, but happy to go away and look further. And again, it's important to, and I know maybe kind of beat this to death, but that's only for maladministration purposes.
Yes.
Well, that's only if you're unhappy with the process and the service you've received.
How it was handled rather than the outcome of the case.
Not the outcome of the case.
Isn't that similar to, through you, Chair, isn't that similar to any judicial, a JR taken, will simply look at sometimes at the process rather than the detail. It will not reopen the case that the individual is unhappy at the outcome. Very likely they will look at the process by which a decision was reached.
Mm-hmm. I think the maladministration is more about the service you've received in terms of unreasonable delay, rudeness, you're unhappy with the treatment you've perhaps received.
Rather than detail.
Rather than the detail.
Or the course taken by, or the ultimate decision taken by the Ombudsman.
I think that's it, yes.
So again, I think, Danny, the one grey area in terms of Ray's examples of maladministration would be this dissatisfaction with the investigation process, which could be, how could you come to that conclusion given the evidence in front of you? That's where I think the lines are, if there is a blur.
Through the chair, that's the same process as in planning process. You're right, the Ombudsman's the same process. It's with maladministration.
Yes.
Similar practice. I mean, anybody who's dealt with planning in the past and with the Ombudsman, that's the exact same process.
And Ray, in terms of the result, we're saying if you're finished with Pony and you're not happy, you've got to go to court for judicial review. Same in Wales, same in Scotland. Did you uncover, is there kind of fundamental rationale, a common theme as to why that is a common policy?
It didn't emerge in the research. I suppose just looking back in previous research I did for the previous incarnation of this committee is that, the Ombudsman, Public Services Ombudsman is sort of where it's a quasi-judicial office, so that's where the buck stops really. So if you put another layer in to say, well, I'm not happy with the outcome that the Ombudsman has delivered, do you put another layer on top of that, and then where does it stop? So perhaps that's the rationale behind that.
If you get to the point where you convince the police ombudsman that there has been some fairly serious maladministration, particularly with regard to dissatisfaction with the investigation process, do you know, is it possible then to ask the ombudsman, police ombudsman, to review the result?
Well, the ombudsman will, yes, the police ombudsman will review the outcome of a decision if you, as a stakeholder, you request that.
Yeah. Okay. Philip?
I was just going to make the point that Ray has kind of reinforced my initial assessment that the system is the system because that's the way it should be. People who don't get a result, there's no reflection, aren't going to be happy if they're unhappy about the result. And they're always going to question the process and whatever. All of these ombudsmen, the only thing I think maybe we should change the name to ombudsperson.
No.
Had that right.
Order.
Sorry.
That's for next year. That's for next year.
No, that was for last year, and that was the year before, and the year before that.
As a new member,
We could direct you to many volumes of Hansard.
But the point is made that whether it's the police ombudsman, the public service ombudsman, the ombudsman, they are there because they have the expertise, the legal experience, and ultimately I would imagine in 97, 98, 99% of the cases they're going to come up with the right decision. And if in those very, very, very small amounts of where the decision maybe isn't questioned rather than the process, then the court is going to end up deciding it. Otherwise you just go around in circles whether you have everybody investigating everybody, and it kind of becomes a bit like the Keystone Cops.
Yeah, I think it is. You're admitting they're not going to get 100% accuracy.
No, sorry. What I'm saying is they're not. They're going to have 2 or 3% of people dissatisfied. I'm not questioning their accuracy because who am I?
2 or 3 dissatisfied.
Who am I to question the outcome? But what I'm saying is, for that 2 to 3% of occasions, there is somewhere else they can go, and that's the court.
But not at no cost. I suppose that's the problem, Cahill.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My understanding of it, and I'm taken from what you've said so far, it's a bit of process, right? Maladministration. That's what the ombudsman is there for. So it's no different from some of the other issues I've dealt with as a public representative. Is there then, going on from that, is there any sanctions then in terms of the process? Or have you found that out?
Maladministration, sanctions available to Public Services Ombudsman. I think it can, I haven't looked at this in a while, but it can include things like apologies, and I'm not sure if there's any financial redress.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, financial redress.
New legislation.
But like I said, Chair, I'll just give an example. I know that one instance where the ombudsman plan, I'll use it for planning process, and it found in favour of this case that an indigent sanction was a monetary payment to that person. Obviously, it was too late for them, but still, that's how they dealt with it. So, but the point I'm trying to get at, it's actually about the process. They follow through a proper process. That process is based on maladministration, whether or not, whoever it is, in this case, with the town service, follow through their process. That's what it's about. And this is a similar process. Is that fair to say?
It is, but I'm not sure if that holds true for the police ombudsman. I don't know what the findings of the Department of Justice are. If a person puts in a complaint of maladministration, what sanctions they can impose on the police ombudsman, if any. So I would say it probably differs somewhat from public services ombudsman. And I think that's probably, so it's the case, it's the two separate issues, maladministration and the decisions reached by the police ombudsman. So is the current process fit for purpose? You know, how accessible is the current process in terms of going to the Department of Justice?
Yeah, that was beyond the brief that you were asked to investigate.
That's fine.
Yeah. Sure.
No, Chair, thank you. It would seem to me that there is quite sufficient oversight mechanisms. You know, where you could have an ombudsman's ombudsman.
Where does it finish?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Ray, I mean, that's not one for Ray. So I think we're content. Thank you very much, Ray.
Thanks. Thank you.
We don't want to start treating it as a hostile political.
No.
Get out of here.
Sorry, he's handled it all right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, members, I think Sean has taken us to, I suppose, the crux of the matter. You know, if you're an ombudsperson, should another ombudsperson be marking your homework? But then again, where do you go if you're not happy with the ombudsman? But there is an answer to the latter. The latter is you take a judicial review.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to fund it and resource it. But are we on the primary point about an ombudsman being referred to another ombudsman? Have we got a committee view that?
Chairman, I think there's a, you know, and I'm conscious of the question, why is there only one Monopolies Commission? You can ask that, right? But in the case of in this case, there are significant powers now taken by the Office of Police Ombudsman, which are significant. And I think that is the concern of the Retired Police Officers Association and others. And it seems to me their key question is why Pony wasn't included in Schedule 3 of the legislation. Now, is that justice legislation, or is that legislation carried through by the Executive Office or FMD-FM?
The previous committee.
This was us as a committee.
Yeah. Okay. So, it might, you know, that seems to be the key issue for them. Why it wasn't included in why Pony wasn't included in Schedule 3. Now, what is the answer to that?
The answer to that is
that require political agreement.
Yes. The answer is that the legislation was 10 years in the making. It started with one of the management consultancies being commissioned by the department to look at the fact that we had an ombudsperson and we had a commissioner for complaints. The consultants came back with a recommendation. They merged the two offices. Mm-hmm. The department then basically said, we are too busy to put it on our work programme. And the committee then said, right, well, we'll do it because committees have the power to bring forward legislation in their own right. And it took an awfully long time. But there was a discussion by a previous iteration of those around this table on this issue. And there was not the political will to include Pony in the schedule for the new public service ombudsperson.
Right. Okay. I suppose then what the Retired Police Officers Association appear to be asking is, committee be prepared to revisit that or to look at that again? You know, did we hear did the previous committee hear evidence from them on this particular issue?
Not in my time.
You're right about the timeline in this. I mean, I think I was chair of FM committee when this was first.
Right.
Right.
No, there's
now we're getting to the crux. Can we write the ombudsman about that there?
Just swing the spotlight round.
2 cameras should be facing over that way.
There we were only in the foothills of that, right?
But yeah, well, the crux of it is there a political will to revisit that? I think you're right, Danny.
Yes. And
It's not even, I mean, a political will. I mean, I think we've heard examples from Ray about the practicalities and the rationale for it in the first instance. I mean, I can understand why the Retired Police Officers Association would be asking for that, because essentially the role of the police ombudsman is to investigate complaints against the. So, I mean, essentially they're always going to, or not always, but in a lot of cases going to be unhappy about that in the first instance and probably the result in the second instance. But you know, I think what we've heard is the system here, how it works, comparable to the system elsewhere. I mean, certainly it's not even a case of political will. You know, I don't see the rationale for it in the first instance.
well, I think, Chair, I would like to have it explained or outlined in greater detail maybe the concerns of the Retired Policemen Association. I don't think there's any harm in that, at least to give us an insight as to concerns that they have and perhaps others may have.
Could I suggest then, although it's the Department of Justice, if it's maladministration, that is your route when you've exhausted your negotiations with PONI, and we don't actually know how often the Department of Justice have been contacted, what the results have been, if and when they have been contacted, and what powers stroke sanctions they have. It would be legitimate for us as part of our deliberations to ask those questions of Claire Sugden.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fair enough.
As a kind of next step. The other thing is, are we all content in our own minds that we know why PONI has been set up in the way it has been set up? And if not, is there value in seeking that information?
I think they would, especially for the new members, I think.
Yeah.
Probably in that.
Okay. So that's two. I know I could be accused of kicking the can down the road, but I want to do them justice. And I think if we're finishing today, we're just saying that's that. So should we take those two action points?
Yeah. No.
And I can't let this go without saying to Philip, we commissioned research from research, and do you know that Ombudsman is gender neutral?
Okay, I didn't.
Well, it was news to us.
Over 250 amendments, wasn't it?
Yeah, I remember it.
We had to amend
debate.
the bill
Right.
something like 250 times because we had ombudsperson,
Okay.
and then it came
Biggest
back
load of
and
amendments.
said it's man is neutral in that context.
The biggest load of amendments over one word ever.
So, okay.
That's it.
We'll still revisit.
Every day.
Right, members, on to TBUC. Back in October the 19th, we got a briefing from the department on TBUC, Together Building a United Community, including the implementation of recommendations from the Legacy Committee's inquiry. That recommended all statutory committees would make it core business to include good relations as part of their regular scrutiny of departmental activity, including monitoring TBUC headline actions where it was relevant to their department. The committee agreed to remind all statutory committees of this recommendation and ask what plans they have to include good relations as part of their scrutiny. The committee also agreed to advise other statutories of the Executive Office's intention to publish an annual report on TBUC and to schedule a take-note debate on that report. The clerk's brief on all this is at page 58, and statutory committee responses begin at page 59. Are you content, to advise the Committee for the Economy, who have asked for good relations indicators or some sort of matrix, that we advise them that they're published annually and that the Executive, in line with our recommendation, have agreed to publish an annual report on TBUC.
Great.
And more generally, content to note the responses from the other statutory committees.
Great.
Excellent. Correspondence next, page 73 of your meeting pack. There's a Delivering Social Change Stakeholder Update, that's page 73. Are you content that the DSC Stakeholder Update is shared with other relevant committees?
Great.
The ISNI Delivery Tracking System Report on Investing Activity is at page 84. Again, content to note?
Great.
And in the absence of comment on any other correspondence, I'll take you to the Draft Forward Work Programme at page 90. Any comments? If not, are we content to agree?
Great.
Any other business? If not, members, and remember we're going into closed session for one item. We adjourn until Wednesday, the 11th of January 2017 at 2 p.m. here in room 30. Merry Christmas.
Same to you.
Ho, ho, ho.
Northern Ireland Assembly, Committee Room 30.